but there's the manner in which it's been handled, and I think that basically has been incompetence, in my view.
So what would you say on the political side, seeing as you are here as a Tory councillor?
Absolutely, I'm a Conservative councillor.
It's a Conservative
well,
government.
Yes, as a Conservative, I believe in freedom and freedom of speech. Now, I have spent a good long time looking at the things this man has allegedly said. I say allegedly because I know it's been contested. Many of the things I find quite distasteful. Some of the things I think aren't actually particularly distasteful, but perhaps a product of his culture and background, and I might disagree with them, but I don't necessarily find them distasteful. But I've yet to see anything that really justifies banning him from this country. I generally think if people say things that I find distasteful or that I disagree with, the best way to get the issue resolved is for all views to be aired and discussed. So, for instance, if, and I say if, he really did claim that 4,000 Jews who worked in New York were warned about the 9/11 attacks, well, that makes him slightly mad, I'd say, or foolish. Let him come here and say it if that's what he said and if that's what he believes, and I think he'd probably be exposed as slightly insane, and we'd leave it at that. But to ban him on the basis of that really just lends, if anything, lends a bit of credence to it, because I can't imagine that him coming here would actually influence that many people towards that point of view.
Well, Sarah, why do you think there's been such a heavy-handed approach to this?
Well, I think, firstly, Sheikh Raed Salah, as you said in the introduction, is a very, very significant figure. And I think, particularly for the Israeli government, he poses a real challenge for them, because the whole basis of arguing for equality, for civil rights, for Palestinian citizens of Israel, who comprise 20% of Israeli citizens, is a real challenge. How can you justify policies of apartheid, dispossession? And so there has been a real attempt to silence those voices we've seen in Israel in numerous occasions in the Knesset. And I think that's the reason why he has been targeted in this way. But I think that the way the government has behaved on this has done them absolutely no good at all, because what's happening is they are being seen to apply very, very strict double standards. When we have a situation where they're trying to change the law on universal jurisdiction to allow Israelis who have evidence against them of war crimes to enter the country more freely, and yet on the other hand they are imprisoning Sheikh Raed Salah, who has basically denied all the allegations against him and has never ever been accused of any crimes of the significance that some of the Israeli ministers have been. That really does smack very significantly of double standards. I think that's the reason why it's such a disturbing precedent that the government's trying to set here. And that's the reason why there has been such shock, not just amongst Palestinians, amongst the Arab world, but also here, in terms of human rights defenders, in terms of those who support international law. And that's the reason why we are calling a demonstration at 5:30 outside 10 Downing Street, because it's very important that the government recognises that what they have done here has created a situation where a Palestinian leader has been treated in absolutely horrific fashion.
Dawood Abdullah, if I can come to yourself. Sarah alluded there to double standards in relation to Israelis who've been accused of war crimes being more free if the government has its way to come to this country. And yet we've had a lot of talk about hate preachers when it comes to Muslims, and indeed some of the controversy around Sheikh Saleh is about the accusation that he is a hate preacher. But then we had people like Geert Wilders coming and actually being hosted in the House of Lords, and many people would say that he's a hate preacher. Is the Muslim Council of Britain concerned about this kind of double standards?
Well, you know, Sam, I can't speak on behalf of the Muslim Council of Britain at the moment, but what I want to say to you is that today there will be a lecture, or tomorrow, at RUSI, the defense think tank, and the person who is being hosted is a retired Israeli general. I urge you and your listeners to do a background search on this individual. You would find horrific stories. You would find calls for extrajudicial killings of Palestinian leaders. How is it that the individual is allowed to enter Britain and to give lectures in a defense institution? This is a big question on double standards that we have to answer now.
So can you understand why there can be a lot of anger when people see what are apparently such double standards?
Absolutely, and I would agree with that. The The problem is, of course, that Israel is a state and is our ally. And so, whilst it may seem apparent to many people, including myself, my sympathies are broadly with the Palestinians. They are a state and are our ally, and therefore, in terms of law, the individuals within that, within the government, perhaps are entitled to a slightly different footing. I think having the war crimes law in the first place, it was always going to be difficult, and you know, I'm not very comfortable with the idea that we're changing it really to suit our own particular needs and to suit particular countries. But I think having that law in the statute book in the first place was actually very difficult.
But didn't it give recourse to that very democracy and human rights and equality before the law, which we are proud of in Britain?
Well, we're very proud of it. The problem is that if you start, if we as a country start basically deciding and arbitrating in disputes between other countries or within other countries and saying we think this is right and this is wrong, then to an extent all these decisions become political. We are simply saying that we think we, in a very sort of simplistic way, dividing the world into goodies and baddies. So we think some people deserve to be arrested for war crimes when they come to Britain,
this is what
and
the
others we
change
can
in law
let off.
would actually help bring about, whereas before that actually everybody was equal before the law, and you had nothing to fear had you not committed war crimes.
But except that we always knew it was never going to be applied in that way. I mean, realistically, you know that we'll allow all kinds of people to come to Britain if we think it's in their interest. I mean, we had the Prime Minister of China come to Birmingham fairly recently for very good business reasons. I mean, I want to see investment in Birmingham, but there are other aspects to consider.
So and once you acknowledge that human rights are very much applied in selected cases and where...
They are. It's a reality, I'm afraid. And I don't think you'll find a country in the world that doesn't take that attitude. And I'm very sorry about that. I really am. You know, my heart and my sympathy is always always with the human rights. But sometimes decisions are taken on a business basis. Now, with regard to the Israeli general that was mentioned, for instance, I would say the same. I would say the same thing about him that I say about the gentleman who's been arrested. Anyone should be able to come here and give their point of view. If people want to demonstrate and protest about that, that's fine. But this is a democracy, and unless people are coming here to incite to violence and murder or to recruit people to murder, those are the only preconditions I'd state. Beyond that,
some people would argue that that is exactly what would be happening when you've got generals who justify what they do and try to get more people to support them in those kinds of actions.
I very much doubt that this general is coming here to recruit people to go over to Israel to fight against the Palestinians. I'm sure he's coming here to say things that I personally would disagree with, but I don't think you could say that he's coming here to incite murder. So by all means, certainly there should be protests because there are double standards here. But as far as I'm concerned, both of these individuals should be allowed to come here and say whatever they like, and we should listen to their arguments on their merits. And we can judge for ourselves who we think is right and who we think is wrong.
Do you think what's happened is actually a sign of the Israeli lobby's strength, or actually the sign of the Palestinian solidarity movement's strength? Do you think that they are panicking now and becoming more and more heavy-handed because they are seeing that more and more people are sympathising with the Palestinian plight? And you yourself were on the flotilla last year that was actually attacked by Israel. It hasn't deterred you. You're still fighting for Palestinians. So how would you actually interpret this?
Well, I go back to a statement Melanie Phillips made just late last year, early this year, where she said Israel has lost the battle of public opinion. And I think that's very true. People around the world have seen what Israel is doing, the crimes it's committing, and they are saying we cannot tolerate this. And the problem for Israel is, as they've acknowledged themselves, it's very difficult to carry on trying to explain how they can justify violating international law, the illegal occupation, for example, the attack on the Freedom Flotilla last year and the sabotage of the boats
I mean, they
this
said
year.
It was your own fault. You shouldn't have been there.
Precisely.
That's how they put it.
Exactly. And that, to them, justified the killing of 9 innocent people and the wounding of over 50. But the problem is that they are unable to explain away their actions, and therefore there has been an increase in attacks, sabotage, and an attempt to try and silence those who are speaking out in favour of peace and justice. And that is exactly, I think, what's happening with Sheikh Raed Salah. They do not want people to come over to Britain and to other countries to explain what really is happening to Palestinians, what really is happening to Jerusalem, and what really is happening to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's the reason why these tactics are being used.
Well, if I can just quickly come back to Dawood Abdullah before we wrap up our first half.